Today I'll be going over Chapter 8 of Alanna Nash's book, The Colonel. Chapter 8 is titled Deeper into America. Nash says that in 1938, Parker was running a penny arcade on the Royal American, selling picture cards from slot machines for a penny apiece. This is when he met Gene Austen, one of the first people to take Parker's confidence seriously. Austen was touring theaters for his Western film, Songs in Saddles, when Parker approached him. Parker was excited to meet the famous singer and told him a polished version of his Carnival background, claiming he had started as a boy with his family. Parker oversold himself to Austen, claiming he was a top-notch press agent and manager who knew all the important people in the area. Nash writes, quote, "In his prime, Gene Austen had been a sensation beyond all imagining. The best-known singer of the late 1920s, Austen became not just the first crooner making way for Rudy Vallée and Bing Crosby, but the first true pop star with the attendant fame and adulation that would later grace the careers of Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, and the Beatles. From 1924 to 1934, he sold an astonishing 86 million records, 5 million alone of My Blue Heaven, an upbeat ballad that celebrated the domestic bliss of Just Molly and Me and Baby Makes Three. Grown men blubbered," end quote. Austen had once made enormous money from RCA Victor, starting with a $96,000 royalty check, but he blew through that fortune on partying with famous friends, cars, mansions, and speakeasies. By the time he met Parker in the late 1930s, Austen's career was fading. The Depression had badly hurt the entertainment industry, and by the time it recovered, Bing Crosby had taken his place in popularity. Austen was drinking heavily and was already dealing with throat problems, and he wasn't sure his voice would last much longer. The night he met Parker, he was 38 years old and was about to headline a traveling tent show called Star-O-Rama Canvas Theater, which toured the rural South in 9 large trucks. Nash writes, quote, "That's when he sent a wire to Parker, who agreed to meet him in Atlanta and showed up with Marie in tow. On the surface, Gene Austen and Tom Parker, or Tommy as he called him, made an odd couple, the tuxedo toast of the town and the coarse young carny with his righteous disregard for middle America's social norms and etiquette. But Austen took an immediate liking to Parker, who loved to hear about the grander escapades of Austen's career, when as a young heartthrob, Austen would return to his hotel room to find women hiding under the bed. Parker was enthralled. What he wouldn't give for an act like that," end quote. For the time, though, Parker focused on helping Gene Austen's manager, Jack Garnes, book and promote the tent show, and he used the Carnival-style publicity tricks he had learned from P.Z. Hoffman. Parker drove an old, beat-up panel truck through small southern towns, scouting locations for the tent show on behalf of Hoxie Tucker, the man in charge of the big tents. Nash says Parker's job was to do whatever it took to fill seats, get permits, find sponsors, place ads, pass out flyers, and plaster posters all over town with homemade paste. Basically, he used every Carnival trick he knew to hype the show and stir up excitement. Parker also worked the local restaurants trying to get advertising and free meals. He hinted the troupe might eat there nightly, but conveniently left out that Star-O-Rama already had its own cookhouse. Gene Austen wrote in his autobiography, "It was obvious Tom knew his business by the way he went about things. In a short while, he had the show going full blast. It looked like we would never know anything but success and money." Nash's success made Parker believe he should be the one managing Gene Austen, not Jack Garnes, and he saw management as a path to the control and the money and importance he craved. He told Gabe Tucker years later, "The stars come and go, but a manager can work until he dies." So, Parker slowly worked his way closer to Gene Austen while pushing Jack Garnes aside. It was an early version of the same kind of maneuvering he would later use around Elvis Presley. It's unclear whether Parker truly managed Gene Austen, as he later claimed, but they became close friends and often went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, where they enjoyed racetracks and the nightlife and illegal gambling among the entertainers and racketeers. Nash writes, quote, "The giddy atmosphere of Hot Springs clearly agreed with him. In a picture taken there in 1939, a grinning Parker strolls down the sidewalk arm in arm with Hoxie Tucker, and in his hepcat sunglasses, two-tone shoes, and combed back hair, thinning dramatically with each passing year. Parker was the very definition of the confident con on the make. Walking the streets of Hot Springs, Arkansas that summer day, Andreas Weinkalk unmasked Tom Parker for what he was, the hustler extraordinaire. Never again would he allow himself to appear so slick and unguarded," end quote. By the end of this season, Austen bragged about how he had made good money, but then he found out the government was taking most of the profits to cover his unpaid back taxes. Parker had to get creative to keep Austen's show going after the tax trouble. When they played Tupelo, Mississippi, Nash points out the irony, Parker found a bit of luck in the hometown of 5-year-old Elvis Presley. When Parker returned to Tupelo years later, he remembered, "We sold out and made enough money to get out of town, which we did in a lot of small cities in those depressed times." He also told the story of how he would leave the truck's tires as collateral for the grocer. One time when the show still owed money to a hotel, Parker found a clever way to stall. He would hang a "held over by popular demand" banner and keep the show in town until they earned enough to pay the hotel bill. Nash says Parker kept Star-O-Rama going by playing on Gene Austen's name. He had Austen pre-sign checks, then used them at gas stations with lots of charm, bragging about how wonderful it was to work for the famous Gene Austen. He'd say, "That's a real autograph there. You might want to hang that one on the wall." Parker knew that each check that went framed on a wall was one less check that would be cashed. He would use the same tactic with Elvis in the 50s. The show finally collapsed in 1940 during a Virginia tour when a marshal seized the gate money and equipment. Nash writes, quote, "In the bleak days of 1940, with a family to care for and no money coming in, Parker found it more difficult to believe that things would soon get better, especially for a Dutchman whose accent sounded vaguely German as the country inched closer to conflict overseas. On September 1st, 1939, the citizens of Tampa unfolded the Morning Tribune to find the banner headline of War and the chilling news that German planes had just bombed Warsaw. Within a year of that terrible day, 2 events transpired that might have dramatically altered the fate of both Andreas Van Kalk and Thomas Parker." End quote. The first was the 1940 Smith Act, which required non-citizens to register with the government. Although it was meant to target subversive activity, it also gave many undocumented immigrants a chance to stay legally if they could prove long-term residences, 5 years, good character, or hardship to an American family member if he was deported. The Alien Registration Act, as it was called, should have been good news for Andreas Van Kalk. It could have forgiven his years of illegal residency and given him another chance to become a U.S. citizen given his stint in the U.S. Army. But as Tom Parker, he had a strange reaction to the chance to fix his immigration problem. He simply ignored it. By doing so, he passed up what could have been an easy way to legalize his status. Marion Smith of the Immigration and Naturalization Service points out the irony. As an overstayed crewman from 1929, after 3 to 5 years, he might have been non-deportable, in that the statutes of limitations would have run out on that offense. But to not register at all in 1940 was a big violation, and yet we have no record of him. Nash ponders, quote, "Why would Parker be so reckless? His reaction to the second important event of 1940, that of the first peacetime draft law in U.S. history, was just as strange. For on October 16th, when Thomas Andrew Parker went to Local Board 1 in the First National Bank building to fill out his registration card and establish a classification record, he made no mention of prior service in any branch of the armed services. By using his new middle name, he silently insisted that it was Thomas Parker who had served in the U.S. Army, not Thomas Andrew Parker. Tom Parker dared not chance resurrecting old ghosts from his past, especially one from 1933 who had undergone a particularly horrific stay at Walter Reed Army Hospital." End quote. Nash says when Parker filled out the registration card, he used the Mott's Tampa address, probably because he and Marie moved around so much. He also listed Gene Austen in Hollywood as his employer, giving himself a more important sounding connection. But Parker's real work at the time was much less glamorous than his Gene Austen connection suggested. He was caring for animals at the fairgrounds and running pony rides with 6 ponies he had bought in Kentucky while scouting locations for Austen. Nash says at this point in his life, other than owning a few ponies, which he got neighborhood kids to groom by telling them he was naming the ponies after them, he was still basically where he was when he left the Army. When money got tight in the off-season, Parker came up with another scam. He put one of his ponies in a dugout hole in the front yard, covered its legs with dirt and straw, and made it look like a tiny miniature horse. Then he'd put up a sign that read, "See the world's smallest pony, only 10 cents. The neighbors reported him and he was threatened with jail time. But just when Parker's pony work seemed to be falling apart, he caught a major break. In late 1940, he learned about a field agent job at the Hillsborough County Humane Society. Nash writes, quote, "The Humane Society position seemed custom-made for Parker's unusual background, a job that allowed him to indulge his love and understanding of animals while calling on his skills as a promoter. In between rescuing meowing kittens hung in trees and caring for the occasional stray cow, Parker was to spearhead fundraising drives that would bring the shelter into the black." End quote. The Humane Society job gave Parker his first steady paycheck in a while, but the real attraction was the perks, especially a furnished, rent-free apartment above the shelter in West Tampa. The apartment was a big upgrade for Tom, Marie, and 15-year-old Bobby, even if it oddly echoed Parker's childhood living above the stables. The job also came with major perks, like free gas and tires if he used his car as an animal ambulance. This was a huge benefit, especially with wartime rationing looming. He loved the Humane Society job because it gave him the perks, also a uniform and a sense of official status. It made him feel important, almost like a county authority figure, and he enjoyed that very much. Parker jumped into the job seriously, and he kept careful records of animal rescue calls. In November 1940, his log entries included complaints like beating pony, Columbus Drive, complaint settled, and goat, no water. Okay, McBerry Street. His log entries later became more detailed. In one, he noted, horse with no shoe pulling ice wagon, 6th Avenue. Man warned to get shoes on horse. And boys shooting birds, Belmont Heights. Field agent gave boys lecture. The Humane Society at that time needed better publicity, and Parker came in with lots of fundraising ideas. Nash writes, quote, he first asked local businessmen to donate money for pet supplies, but that stopped when the word got out that Parker had traded cases of animal food for tuna fish and prime cuts of meat that the Parkers would eat themselves. Then he staged a dog's fall into a deep but narrow hole so he could take up a collection to hire a midget to crawl down for the rescue. Few who came to the Humane Society for any reason left without a pet, and within a year of Parker's appointment, the Humane Society was solvent. What nobody understood, Parker thought, was that he didn't really give away fluffy kittens and snowball pups. He sold magic, end quote. Parker used newspaper coverage and public events to make himself known in the community. By dressing as Santa and giving puppies to children, he created another trusted uniform for himself, this time as a kind, charitable animal lover. He kept playing Santa every December because he liked giving the children gifts and he loved the attention the role brought him. But during lean times, he would sometimes ask the children if they would like to take Santa for a hamburger afterward. Parker's assistant at the Humane Society was Bevo Beavis, a 23-year-old helper from Alabama. Beavis had some lifelong mental limitations and had moved to Tampa from Alabama with his mother and brother after losing his father at age 12. Bevo saw Parker as a father figure and even called him Pops. And because he trusted Parker so much, he was eager to do whatever Parker asked. Parker treated Bevo like a child and gave him the unpleasant jobs Bobby or Marie didn't want to do. Bevo's family felt Parker took advantage of him, though Parker still called him Mr. Beavis in front of others. Bevo became useful in Parker's new pet cemetery scheme. Parker hyped it as a great adventure, then had Bevo clean up the yard behind the Humane Society by clearing weeds, trash, and broken glass. Parker told him, as you know, Mr. Beavis, we have many important people coming out here. We're going to start a new project, and you will be meeting some of the leading citizens in the course of it. I want them to address you by your new title, General Manager of Perpetual Care for Deceased Pets. Parker persuaded a monument company to donate a sample pet gravestone by promising it would lead to future business. The stone read, here lies Spot, a beloved and faithful companion. And Parker planned to use it to attract pet owners to his new pet cemetery. Bevo helped Parker stage the pet cemetery by digging a little grave, piling up dirt, and placing the donated Spot marker at the head of it. Nash writes, quote, Parker was pleased with himself. No pet lover could resist it. He'd pay the monument company $15 and charge the owners $50. But why stop there? Bevo, he called across the yard. Can you make little coffins? Bevo was hardly a carpenter, but he told Pops he would try. And soon Parker figured he could hike the cost of a Fido funeral up to $100 with the casket and a promise to decorate the grave with fresh daisies. Cast-offs he got free from the neighborhood florists, end quote. If a pet owner stopped by and made a remark about the condition of the flowers, Parker would frown and shake his head and say, I wish you could have been here yesterday when we placed them. They're a bit wilted now, but they looked sensational then. Isn't that right, Mr. Beavis? Nash says Bevo stayed connected to Parker on and off for the rest of his life. Their relationship was rocky, with Parker repeatedly firing him and Bevo repeatedly quitting and returning to Tampa. Parker became crueler toward Bevo over time, often turning him into the joke and putting him in humiliating situations. Parker's friend Al DeVorn remembers, Colonel took care of Bevo, but he was rough on Bevo, too. He made Bevo the fall guy. Bevo, despite his flaws, was one of the first young men Parker treated like a son. Over the years, Parker would give that same kind of fatherly title to many younger associates, including Byron Raphael, George Hamilton, Mike Crowley, Greg McDonald, and the Lagarde twins, Ted and Tom. Nash says this raises a bigger question about Parker. Why did he need so many surrogate sons when he already had a stepson in Bobby Ross? And since he reportedly loved children, his childless marriage to Marie adds another mystery. The Parkers seemed genuinely devoted to each other. Marie worked beside him at the Humane Society and also later during the Eddie Arnold years, and despite the temptations of the music world, there were no known stories of Parker having affairs, at least while Marie was healthy. Buddy Killen, a music executive who had met the Parkers in the early 1950s, remembers, "He was always so crazy about Marie in the days that I was around him." There was one strange moment at the Country and Western Disc Jockey Convention in Nashville when Killen happened to run into Tom and Marie as they were entering the Andrew Jackson Hotel. Killen says, "Marie yelled, 'Hey, buddy!' And she held her arms out, and I ran over and hugged her and kissed her on the cheek. And Tom said, 'Hey, boy, stop that. Don't do that anymore.' And he was very serious. I was just a kid, so I wasn't interested in his wife, but he didn't like anybody kissing on her, even a little peck." Killen thought that the Parkers had a great marriage, but Nash suggests it may have been built more on practical partnership than romance, even if Parker still acted jealous. Gabe Tucker said, "I know he and Marie weren't happy at home, or at least not as the years went on." Both Tucker and Bitsy Mott agree that the main issue was Parker's need for domination. Tucker remembers, "As for kids, he liked kids, but he didn't want them around too long." Nash writes, quote, "Parker's perceived fear of emotional intimacy, except with select friends through the years, seemed to spill over into a fear of another kind. Whether rooted in anger or in his need to control, Parker often had a violent reaction to being touched, especially by a woman. Someone as non-threatening as a coffee shop waitress taking his elbow as she poured a cup of coffee could raise an outburst in him that ruined the day." End quote. Psychologist Peter Whitmer thought Parker may have simply been asexual, while one family member believed childhood mumps may have left him sterile. Thus, Parker may have preferred choosing his sons rather than having children of his own. His surrogate sons admired him and treated him like a hero and didn't compete with him for attention. Parker and Bobby Ross had a complicated relationship because Bobby didn't play the son role the way Parker seemed to want. Bobby saw him more like an older friend, and Parker never fully let him in emotionally or legally adopted him. Bobby became more independent in high school, working jobs beginning with a drugstore, making deliveries, saving money, and buying a used car. He also seemed socially well-adjusted and popular, with classmates voting him most athletic with the ideal senior smile. Nash writes, quote, "But Parker apparently resented the handsome teen's popularity as well as his ease with women, for the quick-witted Bobby had inherited his biological father's striking good looks and appetite for the opposite sex. In his job as the drugstore delivery boy, he'd sometimes get a call for a quart of ice cream, be invited inside by the lady of the house, and be there long enough for the ice cream to melt," says Sandra Polk-Ross. Colonel suppressed Bobby because he didn't want him to have the attention. All of the girls thought he was wonderful. Bobby had a longtime sweetheart, Marion Dedine, who had liked him since they were young. After being together through high school, they married on August 18th, 1944, just 2 months after Bobby graduated. Okay, so I don't normally show photos, but I'm going to show you one here of Bobby Ross. He really is good looking. This picture was taken in 1943 at a family picnic. You can see Tom Parker eating a bowl of ice cream in the back row. To Parker's right is Bobby Ross, and next to Bobby is Marion. Marie is in the front row on the left. Anyway, Nash says some Humane Society volunteers resented Parker because he demanded strict cleanliness and order, and even strangely wanted people to call him doctor. Okay, that's odd. But behind his back, these employees mocked his growing size by calling him tiny. That's it for Chapter 8. Stay tuned for Chapter 9, which is titled Nashville's Nasal Wine, Jam Up and Honey, Eddie Arnold and Hank Snow. See you then.